This is the story of how a trespass cracked a kingdom and opened a door. Julio Medina thought he was buying silence. A salt-bitten pile at the end of a dirt road, a place to rinse his name out of other people's mouths, just a ruined ballroom and the sea's low thunder. Then, on his first late return, a candle shivered in a window that should have been black, and a boy in gray leg braces stared up like a sentry. "Are you the owner?" the boy asked. The woman stepped in front, jeans torn, white shirt dusted with grit. Her hands were empty until he noticed the paring knife. Small, shaking, unflinching. "We'll go," she said. "Please give us a minute." Here's the crossroad. Old Julio dials a number, and the problem disappears. The man he's trying to be listens first. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. And trust me, the best part is yet to come. Now, let's get back to it. Fog dragged off the inlet. Gravel crackled as he nosed through pines around the estate. He'd driven for hours to hear the floor complain. The mansion listed over the slope like a tired ship, boards gaped. Ivy clawed. Windows were cataracts of salt. Still, he could almost see it. Light from tall panes, a chandelier remembering its job. He didn't want witnesses if he failed. He crossed the yard, boots whispering in dry grass. The porch scraped under his weight. On the threshold he smelled wet wood, and something warmer, chicken broth. Thyme, lemon, soup. The foyer had been swept. A rope brace held the warped door. Cardboard and plastic sealed a bay. Blue painter's tape marked boards with arrows and notes in a child's hand. Quiet, squeaks. Good. He followed the tape into the servants' corridor and stopped. 2 bedrolls, a tub of pill organizers labeled in neat pen, a space heater with a carbon monoxide badge, a hand-drawn map in neon marker, rooms tagged safe and loud, red X's over broken glass. And there, boy in braces clutching a toy, woman holding him as if the distance between her arms and his heart was 0. "Are you the owner?" the boy repeated. "I am," Julio said. "Name's Julio." Her gaze touched his neck tattoo, the scars on his knuckles, the gun at his hip he hadn't touched. "We didn't break anything," she said. "We fixed things, we'll leave." "What's your name?" "Cherie, this is Kyle." Kyle lifted the toy in a small salute. "Monkey says hello." Julio almost smiled. "You chose a bad house." "We chose a wide hallway," Cherie said, "and a hospital we can reach without changing buses." Her voice was calm and raw at the edges. The paring knife was still in her hand. Not the kind of blade that wins, just the kind mothers hold when nothing else shows up. Julio looked again with the eye he used for crews. The fixes weren't vandal work. They were threat modeling. Panes sealed against wind. Towels rolled at thresholds. A kitchen timer taped above the heater to remind someone to crack a window. Whoever made this nest understood risk. "You know whose place this is?" he asked. "Yours. But empty." "Not anymore." She swallowed but didn't back up. "We'll be gone before sundown." Kyle shifted and the braces clicked. "Mom, my boots hurt." "We're leaving," she murmured, then to Julio. "Please." The reflex rose like tide water. Step back, make the call, trespassers out, locks changed, ledger clean, and yet the candle, the soup, the labeled meds, the map, none of that belonged to thieves. Those were the rituals of people trying to keep a child breathing through the night. "Sit," Julio heard himself say. "Both of you. Talk to me." "Talk?" "Tell me why my house smells like broth and not smoke." They sat on milk crates near the heater. After a beat, he lowered to the step opposite, hands open on his knees. The gun felt theatrical. Cherie offered the short version. Eviction without notice, hospital paperwork that fell down a well, an accident in a stairwell with dead lights, a landlord with the wrong friends, A son who walks better when the ground is even and the ramp isn't slick with rain. A mother who ran out of places to wait for calls that never came. Kyle pointed at the neon map. "That room screams when you step there," he said. "We put tape so you remember." Julio didn't answer. He pulled a shipping tag from his pocket and wrote 3 lines. House rules. Honesty. Work. Boundaries. Stay. Temporary. Review nightly. Owner, J. Medina. He slid the tag across the floor. "You break those, I call my people. You keep them, you stay until we solve this." "Why?" Cherie asked. "Because I have 1,000 bad habits," Julio said, "and I'm trading one today." Footsteps scuffed on gravel, the sweep of headlights across the boarded bay. Julio glanced toward the foyer, then back at them. He tucked the tag into his shirt pocket, rose, and ignored the radio. "Renovation crew," he called through the door. "Try tomorrow." An engine turned. The sound faded down the drive. Kyle's shoulders lowered. Cherie released a breath she'd been hoarding. Sun caught dust and turned it to glitter. "Okay," Julio said. "We're making a list. Ramps, handrails, generator checks, sleep hours. A number you call only if the heater beeps. And you'll show me how you sealed that bay." "Your men cut corners?" Cherie asked. "Always." "And the knife?" he said. She slid it into a drawer. "It wasn't for you. It's for the part of the night that doesn't listen." Outside, the pines swayed. The sea drew a stripe. Inside, a room that once hid servants held something like a council. Night crept. Julio felt the city tug. Rivals, debts, but the candle stayed steady. "Start at the beginning," he said. "How did you end up here, Cherie?" She nodded, set Kyle on the crate between them, and began. The headlights raked the boarded bay again, a white sweep that made Kyle flinch. Julio didn't look away from Cherie. He thumbed the radio, kept his voice level. "Renovation crew only," he said into the static. "Try tomorrow." A pause. Then, "Copy, boss." The engine reversed down the lane, gravel whispering under the tires. First crack in the mirror people held of him. The man who always called in muscle had waved it off. "Thank you," Cherie said, voice low, as if gratitude might wake something dangerous. She gathered Kyle closer, one arm a band across his small ribs. Dirt had turned the white of her shirt the color of tea, a sleeve torn at the elbow. The paring knife was gone, but she stood like it was still there, chin up, knees braced. Her eyes skimmed Julio fast, inventorying the neck ink, the old split across his bottom lip, the scars that lay under the rolled sleeves of a red shirt. Then she turned her attention outward, towards the house itself, the way people who stay alive scan for exits. Back stair, pantry hatch, window latch. Kyle poked the neon map with a finger. "Mom, if we tell him the loud boards, he won't step on them." "Show me," Julio said. The boy slid off the crate. The braces clicked at the ankle, small hinges that were more stubborn than noisy. "They help me go straight," he explained without being asked. "My legs do zigzags when they're tired." "How long until they get tired?" Julio asked. "Depends what kind of tired," Cherie answered. "Muscle tired is after 15 minutes. Pain tired is when the weather changes. He's okay right now, but it drops fast. He needs water every hour. Meds at 8, noon, 4, 8. The orange bottle goes with food." Julio nodded once. Information was a kind of currency. "We'll run on your clock." They walked the corridor. Kyle tapped boards with his knuckles. Quiet plank, scream plank. Then labeled the edges with fresh tape. He scribbled fast on a stretch between the laundry and the service stairs, then bumpy at a threshold where a nail had pushed up like a tooth. Too loud over the foyer's center tile. He took the job as seriously as a foreman, a small inspector whose entire body was a checklist. "Ramps first," Cherie said. "Then handrails, a backup light for if the power drops, and a space to cool down without drafts." Julio pulled a roll of receipts from his pocket. rubber-banded and damp at the edge from sea air. "Materials are on these orders." He tore the band, spread the slips across the crate, and slid them toward her. "Check I didn't miss what matters." She scanned without touching at first, reading names the way she'd taught herself to read people. Fast, exact. Her finger stopped above a supplier's mark. "This vendor," she said, frowning. "Northland Consolidated. They do bulk hardware, sure, but the carrier listed here, Salt Crown, runs money through apartment complexes on the east side." "You know them?" Julio asked. "We knew their landlord." Her mouth thinned. "Same shell chain. The stairwell where Kyle fell, the lights had been out for weeks. We reported, they said it was fixed. Paper said it was fixed." She tapped the carrier name again. "They're tied to a crew." He didn't say which crew. He didn't have to. A tiny pressure grew behind his right eye, anger trying to become headache. He let it die there. "We'll buy local from now on," he said. "Cash." He took out a battered ledger, green cloth cover, notebook thick with receipts slid between pages like pressed leaves, and a thin envelope of bills he put both on the crate. "You'll keep track," he said to Cherie. "Anything you need for the ramps and rails. We'll reconcile nightly. Don't round up, don't round down. Exact numbers." "You're giving me cash?" she asked. "I'm giving you accuracy." She weighed him, then the money, then the ledger. "You'll get a list by morning," she said. "Ramps, handrails, generator checks, backup batteries, tape, screws with reel heads so the bits don't strip, no drywall anchors for rails, lag bolts into studs only." Her gaze came back to the red shirt, the scars, the tattoos climbing his wrist like ivy. "And we need a rule." He arched a brow. "If someone bangs on the door," she said, "we don't open. We look first, we call first. Kyle goes to the back pantry and waits, even if it's the good guys." "There are no good guys," Julio said, then amended. "There are careful ones. We'll add a peephole." "Lower," Kyle said. "For me." Julio pointed towards the foyer, instinct giving his body old edges. "You—" "Don't point," Kyle said, frowning. "Say my name." Julio's hand fell. "Kyle," he corrected. "We'll put the peephole at your eye level. You'll be the first inspector." The boy considered, satisfied. "Okay." Cherie watched the exchange, something like surprise shading into relief. She wrapped the ledger in a plastic grocery bag, double-knotting the handles. "The generators," she said. "If they fail, we need heat for his room first." Julio gestured. "Show me the outlets you use. We'll mark one to the priority circuit." They moved through the narrow wing, and for every practical note they stuck, Cherie tucked a little more of her fear away. The more the house spoke in labels, the less it felt like a cliff edge. At the kitchen nook, Julio opened a cabinet and placed 3 bottles of water on the low shelf. "For the hour marks," he said. "Set a timer for the first." "Already on," Cherie said, turning the egg timer she'd taped above the heater earlier. "We learned that the hard way." "Who helped you with all this?" Julio asked, nodding at their careful prep. "The map, the CO badge?" "No one. County library for the rest. When the system won't show up, you build a smaller one that does." He almost said that she sounded like him a lifetime ago, before the ledger had shifted from counting boards to counting bodies. He didn't. He lifted the receiver off the dead wall phone, set it down again. "We'll bring a cell hub," he said. "Signal's weak, but we'll make it enough." Kyle studied the arches of the braces. "Do you have a dog?" he asked. "No dogs," Julio said. "They're loud." "Good," Kyle said. "Dogs bark at me like alarms." He didn't ask why. Not every alarm has a reason it can explain to itself. They spent the next hour making the house legible. Tape lines for paths, a whiteboard on the pantry door with a grid. Meds, water, ramp checks, quiet hour. Cherie wrote the schedule with the same tidy hand she'd used to label pill boxes. Julio learned the rhythm of her day by the way she placed the pen back. Deliberate. never rushed. He also learned where she kept the kitchen knife now, in the drawer nearest the heater, blade wrapped in a dish towel so Kyle wouldn't reach without looking. When the generators groaned alive under his foreman's temporary patch, the bulb above the sink flickered to yellow. Cherie clicked it off quickly. "Not yet," she said. "Better to leave dark rooms dark until we have curtains." "Why?" "Because people look where light is. The neighbors on the ridge can see the kitchen windows." "You've done this before," Julio said. "I've tried not to get caught before." He cut plywood for 2 windows himself, the saw rasping the quiet open and shut. Dust filmed his forearms, turned the tattoos the color of smoke. He held each sheet in place while Cherie drove screws, her stance tight, efficient. Kyle counted to 10 for each screw head. When the panels were up and the room held its breath again, all 3 of them stayed still, waiting to see if the house exhaled trouble. It didn't. "Money," Julio said, remembering. He pushed the envelope toward Cherie. "Don't stretch it. Don't starve it." She slid it inside the ledger and buttoned her pocket. "You'll have receipts," she said, "and a list for morning." He left them at the heater and went to the front door with a box of hardware. A peephole took 5 minutes if you didn't care where it sat. He measured the first at his eye line, then measured again lower, the way Kyle had stood. He drilled the second hole where a 4-year-old would expect the world metal kissed wood. Shavings spiraled to the floor. Cherie appeared behind him, testing a small latch she'd scavenged from a closet. "This on the pantry," she said, "so it stays shut when we need a quiet place." He handed her a screwdriver. She set the latch with calm hands and shook the door to prove it would hold against a draft, but open if a child pushed. "Good," Julio said. "Good," she echoed. He gestured to the lower peephole. "Inspector." Kyle rolled forward and pressed an eye to the brass circle. "I can see the porch," he announced, "and the boots if someone stands close." "That's the point," Julio said. He went to fetch the last of the receipts from his truck. When he opened the front door, something slid across the threshold and kissed his boot. A white legal envelope, thin, too crisp for this damp air. The return address was a downtown firm he knew as surely as he knew his own cost of silence. Cherie saw his face change. "What is it?" He didn't answer yet. He tore the flap with his thumb, pulled a single page free, and felt the old life reach for his pulse. "Eviction. Notice," it read, bold and officious, "for the property at 726 Harbor View, his mansion. Citing non-payment to a landlord whose name did not belong anywhere near this house, the date was wrong by a month. The clerk's stamp was a photocopy, the signature a forgery he'd seen used to push families out on a Thursday night." He turned the page so Cherie could see. Her mouth tightened, not in surprise but in recognition. "They want you out of your own home," she said. "Or they want a fight they think they know how to win," he said. A cold wind moved down the hall, even with the plywood up. The house had learned a new sound, paper against wood, the hiss of a war that didn't need guns to hurt. Julio slid the fraud back into its envelope and set it on the foyer table like a snake in a jar. "Tomorrow," he said, voice steady. "We start with the ramps." Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. It helps more people discover stories like this one. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, take a deep breath, because what happens next will change everything. By morning, the envelope looked smaller, like paper that had lost its nerve. Cherie didn't give it a chance to recover. She slid the notice onto the crate, smoothed the creases with her palm, and read silently once, twice. Then she clicked a pen. "This statute," she said, underlining. "Wrong jurisdiction. They copied the landlord-tenant code, not the owner-occupier ordinance. Also," she tapped the blue stamp. "That's a photocopy. County seals use heat ink. They smudge when you rub. This one doesn't." She circled the clerk's scrawl at the bottom. And these initials belong to a woman who retired last spring. You know the clerk's initials? Julio asked. County records for 5 years. I can still hear what their staplers sound like. She flipped the page over, holding it to the light. Watermarks off, and the date put service on a Sunday. No service on Sundays. She capped the pen. Fraud, lazy even. We'll keep it, but not because it's scary, because it's evidence. Julio's foreman, Tino, arrived with coffee and a suspicion of everything. He eyed Cherie, the ledgers, the taped paths and new peephole, and tried on a grin that never settled. Boss, I brought the lien form for the east retaining wall. That contractor's ghosting. Give it here, Cherie said, and Tino looked to Julio as if needing permission to breathe. Julio nodded once. She scanned the form and shook her head. You're filing against the wrong party, she said. You put the tenant association as debtor, not the shell that holds title. They'll ignore you, and you'll lose your place in line. Tino bristled. I've been filing liens since last year, and badly, she said, not unkind. She pulled a fresh page from the ledger and wrote in her clean, teacherly hand. Full legal name of owner as it appears on the deed-correct parcel number. Attach a copy of the certified mail receipt, not the postcard, and deliver a courtesy copy to the bank's trustee so they know someone's watching. They process faster when they feel seen. Tino glanced at Julio, then back at the paper. You a lawyer? No, she said. I had to learn where the paper cuts are because they kept cutting us. He took the notes, that grin finally fitting. Got it, thanks. The house hummed with the new generator. Julio still didn't trust it. Kyle didn't either. After breakfast, he wheeled his map to the pantry and solemnly declared, Drill. What kind? Julio asked. Lights off, noise on, we practice. They set timers. Cherie explained, if the power goes down, we go to steps. 1. Heater off. 2. Open the high bathroom window 2 inches. 3. Kyle's room gets the battery lantern. 4. Call if the temperature drops below 68. You're the boss, Julio said. Kyle considered and nodded. The smallest promotion of Julio's life. They killed the mains. The house exhaled, then listened. In the quiet, Kyle's braces clicked like metronomes as he moved through the sequence he and his mother had rehearsed in every apartment that had taught them how to leave quickly. Halfway through the drill, real life decided to test them. The generator coughed, stuttered, and died. The bulb over the sink didn't flicker. It went to black like a lid wind pushed at the plywood. It felt, for a breath, like the old world reclaiming the house. Step 3, Kyle said, calm. Cherie already had the lantern lit. Julio cursed the foreman under his breath and jogged outside, sleet pricking his face, coastal weather that didn't believe in the clock. He pulled the shroud, checked fuel, checked choke, and saw the problem. A loose ground. He tightened it, primed, pulled. The generator caught like a stubborn heart. When he came back in, Cherie had Kyle wrapped in a blanket on the milk crate, lantern haloing his small, serious face. It worked, Kyle said. We didn't shout. You didn't, Julio said, and he heard himself add, good drill. He felt the echo of another night. The hallway in a 2-bedroom that smelled like cigarettes and lemon cleaner, his little brother's feet cold on tile. The first time Julio understood that a door without a lock isn't a door. It's a suggestion. He remembered cupping a hand over his brother's ear to make the world smaller, while men argued in a language both of them knew too well. He remembered how long it took to stop hearing that argument in other rooms. He built a world of locks after that. He never thought to build one of ramps. By noon, the wind had stalled, and the generator purred steady. Cherie returned to the table and the growing bank of receipts. She'd separated them into neat columns with headings in pencil. Materials, tools, safety, fuel, other. Julio dropped a few more slips. plywood, lag bolts, weatherproof tape. Local, he said. Cash? She nodded, then paused over yesterday's stack. Can I keep these overnight? She asked. I want to chart the supplier chains. Why? Because if I see one more shell like Salt Crown, I'll know who's tugging the other end of the line. Pull it, Julio said. She did. For an hour the crate felt like a records counter. Paper slid, names clicked against names. The same three entities held different masks across multiple invoices: Northland Consolidated, Salt Crown Logistics, and Mariner Point Holdings. Cherie sketched the triangles, drew arrows for flow, circled intersections. Julio had seen men build an ambush with fewer lines. Tino came back in greasy from the generator and waited like a kid at a principal's door. I filed the lien your way, he told Cherie, shy proud. Got the clerk to stamp it right. She looked up. Good, she said. Not performative, just exact. Respect settled into the room the way heat does when you stop noticing it. The chain map grew. A vendor listed on the stone order used a P.O. box registered to a holding company that rented to the slumlord whose stairwell had swallowed Kyle. Another line crossed an old name Julio knew too well, Rivas Rentals, a dummy through which Lieutenant Rivas had moved cash when they were still small enough to count by hand. Julio's jaw set. He took one of the invoices, turned it. The signature block belonged to a controller at a front on the east side, a woman who never signed anything without checking 2 bank portals and a horoscope. On this one she'd signed in pen that looked tired. The routing number beneath was off by 2 digits. Double book, he said. One routed right, one routed wrong one lands in a new bucket. Cherie slid the invoice beside a fuel slip and traced the digits with the pen tip. See the pattern? They pick numbers that rhyme with yours. If clerks hurry, they don't see it. Who's they? Tino asked. Julio didn't answer. He already knew the curve of the R well enough to see it in another man's shadow. Kyle rolled up, holding his monkey like a witness. Is this the bad men? He asked. It's the lazy men, Cherie said, which is worse on paper because it hides longer. They ate soup over the ledger, Julio standing, Cherie perched, Kyle concentrating on not dripping. The receipts dried in small curls around their bowls. Afternoon light made a grace out of dust in the air. When the sun slid and the cold crept back, Julio lit a fat candle and set it in a glass the color of old honey. The pages went gold. Numbers looked softer until you read them twice. The house felt old and alert at once. Here, Cherie said suddenly, fingertips stopping on a routing line. This isn't yours. Julio leaned over her shoulder. The number jumped sideways into an account he hadn't authorized at a bank he didn't use, the kind that loved quiet money. The payee name was a contractor Rivas had handpicked. The memo: Masonry, East Wing. They hadn't touched the East Wing. Tino, Julio said, voice low. Yeah, boss. Tomorrow we bring in a man who prints statements faster than he prints excuses. Tino swallowed and nodded. Cherie looked at Julio, not afraid, but preparing. If a man inside is doing this, he'll think the house is leverage. He'll be wrong, Julio said. The candle had burned a dish into the wax, a little lake that made the flame look like it was floating. The ledger's green cloth drank the light. Julio's phone, face down on the crate, shivered across the wood. He checked the screen. Rivas. He stepped into the foyer, let the cold at the door rinse his tone, and answered. Boss, Rivas said, easy as a lie, you need more distance on that property. Bad optics? Lot of chatter? Let me handle the contractors. Keep your hands clean. Julio watched the peephole he'd set at a 4-year-old's height. The house waited. Funny, he said. I was about to say the same to you. Rivas chuckled in a way that didn't reach the vowels. I'm looking out for you. I know exactly what you're looking for, Julio said, and hung up. Morning made work simple. Tape the path. Mark the studs. Set the anchors. By 8, the corridor buzzed with a choreography that ignored sleep. Julio stripped a rail from the ballroom balcony and sanded it to clean wood. Tino cut the uprights. Cherie measured twice and called out the numbers like a metronome. Kyle, solemn as a foreman, wore a dust mask too big for his face and held the level against the wall with both hands. "Bubble in the middle," he announced. "Boss says it's good," Tino murmured, tightening the lag bolts until the wood answered with a low, satisfying note. They moved room to room, handrails at elbow height, edges taped, thresholds shaved where nails stood up like teeth. When sawdust lifted in sunlight, Cherie shut the blinds with 2 quick motions. "Neighbors on the ridge," she reminded. "Light makes us loud." They ate soup off the hot plate at 10 and 2, steam fogging the taped window. Kyle counted his sips and grinned when the spoon clinked the bottom. "No spills," he reported, proud of a victory so small only people who had lost bigger things could hear it. Between tasks, while the drill cooled, Cherie sorted papers. FOIA request forms printed from a library site she knew by muscle memory. Copies of vendor lists, screenshots of routing numbers. The crate became a public counter again, this time without the glass. She wrote with the stubby pencil no one stole because it looked like work and not magic. At noon, Kyle decided on a test. 3 steps without a handrail. He stood with feet braced in the metal cuffs, jaw set. Julio hovered behind him, palms out but not on. "You tell me when," Julio said. "I'm your guardrail." 1, Kyle said. 2. The 3rd step wobbled. He caught himself on the new rail, mouth pinched with effort. 3, he breathed, and the relief in the corridor felt bigger than it deserved. "Again later," Cherie said, smoothing his hair back. "Not because you can't, because we pace." "You and the boss pace," Kyle said. "I just count." The afternoon brought a ramp delivery, 2 aluminum sections Julio refused to trust, until he'd walked them 20 times in boots and then in socks to judge the slip Kyle supervised from the bottom, banging the heel of his brace against the lowest plate. "It rings right," he said, satisfied. "Not like the ones at the clinic." "What do those sound like?" Julio asked. "Like somebody forgot they were 4 people," Kyle said, and went back to banging. When dusk thinned the edges of the trees, the house converted. Tools went into the pantry. The hot plate surrendered its kingdom to paper. Cherie's ledger opened. The green cloth caught candlelight. She stacked today's receipts, recording totals, then slid into a different mode. Quiet, carnivorous, the night audit. She mapped shell companies with lines that looked like fishing wire. 1 FOIA request queued to the county for vendor histories, another for a list of code violations attached to buildings held by Mariner Point. She didn't ask Julio to sign. She would send the requests from the library in town under her name. Paper had better odds when it wore the face of a woman who'd spent years waiting at the counter. "You should sleep," Julio said. "After I teach tomorrow's clerk how to do his job," she said, and traced noon's triangle again. Northland Consolidated, Salt Crown, Mariner Point. "These 3 feed each other. The P.O. boxes are neighbors." "Neighbors?" "Same row. Same hour stamped on the last pickups. People think paper is anonymous because it's quiet. Paper is the loudest thing in the room if you know where to listen." He watched her listening. He wanted to ask if she had anyone to listen for her before this. The question felt rude in a way that had nothing to do with etiquette. Kyle tugged his sleeve. "What if the bad men come back?" "They'll find more locks than they remember," Julio said. "What if they bring a key? Then they'll find me." Kyle nodded like that matched the math he understood. "And if you're not here?" Julio looked at Cherie. She answered softly. "Then they'll find me." The house held that for a beat, as if walls could take vows. Later, with Kyle asleep under a blanket patterned with constellations that didn't match the coast, Cherie and Julio sat at the crate and shared the kind of silence that isn't empty. She touched the edge of the ledger. "I didn't pick this house for fate," she said. "I picked it because the corridors are wide and the porch can take a ramp. That's it. No romance ramps." "I didn't buy it for fate either," he said. "I bought it to hide." She nodded as if that confirmed another calculation. "Pity makes you small," she said. "Ramps don't. They say, 'We planned for you.' I want my son to grow up in a place that planned for him." He thought of the peephole set at a child's eye. "We'll plan." "Planning is love that knows how to use a tape measure," she said, and the corner of his mouth betrayed him. At midnight, an email from the library printer chimed the phone they kept face down. Cherie fetched the pages, warm and curling. A vendor cross-reference scraped from public filings and 2 property ledgers for buildings owned by Mariner Point. It didn't give names, but it gave patterns. "There," she said, circling an LLC name that looked like an inside joke, RLM Services. Registered 3 months ago at the same mailbox as Northland Soul Manager, Elena Mir. Julio didn't blink. "Rivas's girlfriend." "She lists consulting and design on her socials," Cherie said. "Her design is hiding a hose from the bank." She drew arrows. "Funds jump from your front to Northland, then through RLM to Mariner. Mariner holds the loans on buildings your lieutenant empties with eviction notices like the one we got." "Circle it," Julio said, even though her pen had already done the job. By 2, the flowchart had stopped looking like ink and started looking like a plan. She printed it, the paper steady in the candlelight. She let the ink dry, flipped it, printed the second page, routing numbers bold, dates underlined. Insurance. Not because she didn't trust Julio, but because Storms were honest about one thing. They took whatever wasn't nailed down. She stood, crossed to the gallery where a board lay loose near the baseboard, and knelt. The sound of the flathead under the screw was nearly noiseless. She lifted the plank, slid the pages into a ziplock, pressed the air out, then tucked the bag into the hollow where dust smelled like old rope. The floorboard dropped back with a soft kiss of wood on wood. When she straightened, Julio was at the doorway. "Good hiding place," he said. "It won't stay secret if someone tears the room apart," she said. "It buys us time if someone only thinks to open doors." He nodded, filed the location by a notch in his mind, where he kept maps of exits and men. In the morning's gray edge, when the world hadn't decided if it was kind or cruel yet, Kyle insisted on supervising the first ramp roll. "Inspector," Julio said, and saluted. The boy braced and eased his way down to the yard where frost limbed the grass. He reached the bottom, turned, and grinned up the incline like he'd just found a long-lost staircase that forgave him for not loving stairs. Cherie's face did something softer than relief. It relaxed the muscles she kept for defense, and let another version of herself breathe. They were still smiling when Julio's phone shivered again. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the number, blocked, and the preview. An image. He opened it. The picture was crisp in the way malice is. Cherie in her one clean sweater, Kyle beside her in braces, and a hospital wristband, both on a sidewalk under the blue H of the regional medical center. The angle was high, shot from across the street. Whoever took it had time to frame. A text line bloomed beneath. "Nice family?" Julio's thumb tightened until the bone in his hand spoke. He heard the old world, the one with locks and ledgers and debt that never slept, step up to the door and tap twice. He didn't show Kyle. He didn't raise his voice. He turned the screen so only Cherie could see. She inhaled sharply, then let the air out slow. "So we're not invisible," she said. "We never were," Julio said. "We were just quiet." "What now?" she asked. "Now we stop being easy to photograph," he said, and looked toward the ramp as if it were a drawbridge he'd finally remembered how to raise. They prepped the house like a mouth before surgery. Nothing extraneous, everything sterile, the path to the cut lit and clear. Julio walked room to room with Tino, pointing at objects that could become weapons or rumors and sending them to the pantry. Toys, the hot plate, the extra chair with the torn cane back. He left the rails and the ramp. He left the map Kyle had drawn because it told the truth about where the floor protested. He stationed men on the property line at distances a child couldn't clock. Out by the boathouse, in the tree line above the drive, one in the gardener's shed that faced the old tennis court radios on vibrate. Orders simple. No shots unless the house itself is bleeding. "Where's Kyle during the meeting?" Cherie asked. "In the cool room with headphones," Julio said. "He'll think it's generator testing. He won't see them." "And if something goes wrong?" Julio nodded toward the new ramp lights, thin LED strips set beneath the handrail. "You wired the silent alarm?" She showed him the switch, a small white button recessed near the base, easy for a child to hit, hard for a man to notice. "One press," she said. "Front, side, and boathouse teams get the buzz. No noise in here." "Good," he said, "which was code in this house, for I am trusting you with my name." By noon, the ballroom was a geometry of sawhorses and a folding table under the ghost of a chandelier. Plaster freckles dotted the floor like old snow. The east wall was a mouthful of studs, half the lath stripped. The boards made the room sound bigger than it was. Julio liked that. It meant every move would echo. Rivas arrived in a clean jacket and a grin that sold cars in neighborhoods that didn't have garages. Two of his hand-picked contractors trailed him, all swagger, no tool calluses. "Boss," Rivas said, arms spread. "You called a board meeting in a haunted house. I couldn't say no." Julio didn't bother with handshake theater. "Sit." Cherie had dressed like an accountant about to ruin a party. Washed sweater, hair tied back, paper in a neat stack. She didn't look at Rivas when he tried to measure her. She looked at the table as if numbers had faces. "We'll keep this brief," Julio said. "I want to go back to building." "Music to my ears," Rivas said. Cherie slid the top sheet forward. "This," she said, "is your money laundering as it passes through legitimate vendors to illegitimate drains, Northland consolidated invoices, Salt Crown carrier fees, RLM Services consulting retainers, all converging into Mariner Point's debt instruments for buildings later cleared by fraudulent notices." She tapped the routing numbers with her pen. "You changed 2 digits per transfer and counted on clerks being tired." Rivas laughed, big and generous like a wedding toast. "She reads blogs, huh? Boss, we're really doing this? With props?" "Look at the dates," Julio said. Rivas skimmed and shrugged. "We're expanding. You bought yourself a palace. I financed the neighborhood. We're all improving something." "And the eviction notices?" Cherie asked softly. "Improving who?" He ignored her, eyes on Julio. "We good here, Jay? You're making people nervous bringing civilians into the balance sheet." "The balance sheet brought itself into my house," Julio said. Rivas's smile pinched. He flicked the top page back with 2 fingers. "Cute." He turned toward the window as if bored by the sunlight. His right hand dipped, aimed at the folder, not for a weapon but for possession. A toddler's reflex. If I hold it, it's mine. Cherie didn't pull the file back. She pressed the button under the rail with her left hand. No siren, no shout. The house simply took a breath and held it. Outside, a ripple passed through the property like wind changing its mind. The boathouse door eased inward. The shed's shadow deepened. Footsteps, soft as rain, converged. Tino was first through the ballroom door, then 2 others Julio trusted with the kind of trust you can't buy. They fanned without hurry, shoulders loose, eyes heavy-lidded, men who had rehearsed quiet so long it became the loudest warning in the room. Rivas's contractors reached for pockets and found palms at their elbows before they could complete a thought. "No," Julio said, and the word carried the weight of a month of deciding who he could still be. Rivas let his arms float up as if mocking compliance. You going to make a scene? Here? In your refuge? He said the last like it tasted sweet and wrong. No scene, Julio said. Numbers. He nodded to Tino, who laid a small stack of documents beside Cherie's charts. Bank pulls, account freezes, a list of badge numbers that weren't friendly anymore. Accounts locked, Julio said. Vendors notified, trustees alerted, and these, he flicked the last page with a finger, are affidavits from 2 officers you thought you owned. They're tired of pushing families into the street. Rivas's laugh went tight and small. You called the cops? He spit the word like it insulted both of them. You don't know how to use what you own anymore. I know how to cut out rot, Julio said. Access, not bodies. He looked at the contractors. Your invoices are done. If you cut corners, you refund. If you signed for work you didn't perform, you return the money. Today. Or you spend the weekend answering questions to people with longer weekends than mine. They wilted, almost gratefully. Rivas didn't. He leaned back, chair on 2 legs, the grin back like he'd found a story only he could hear. You think you can bury me with paper, Jay? Paper's what we've always eaten. Julio set a pen on the folder, cheap ballpoint, blue cap chewed, like a weapon built for a different war. One choice, he said. Sign your interests in RLM and Mariner to a tenant defense fund right now. Walk out with your jacket and your mouth, or keep it all and meet the cops you think are yours at midnight. Rivas's eyes went mean. He flicked his glance at Cherie. Quick, the kind of inventory that turns a person into leverage. This the reason, huh? Your Boy Scout routine? The lady and the kid? That photo going around made you sentimental? Cherie didn't flinch. The photo made you sloppy, she said. You're in my seat, Rivas told her. She set the pen between them. No, I am the one telling the clerk which line to stamp. He snorted, snapped the chair down, snatched the pen, and scribbled his name on the transfer like he was carving into someone's trunk. Halfway through the second page, he stopped and let the pen fall. Nah, he said, smirking. Can't do it. Not today. Tino's hand found his shoulder gently and did the opposite of violence. He guided. 2 more stepped to Rivas's flanks. Rivas looked to Julio for the old reprieve, the crooked nod that used to mean not in front of company. He got nothing. You're finished, Julio said, and discovered the sentence felt less like a bullet than a closure. Accounts are already frozen. Your girlfriend will have to find a new hobby that doesn't end up in discovery the evictions you funded. Lawyers are waiting to lift them before dinner. Rivas tried on a laugh again and failed. You forget who taught you to breathe, kid, he said as they walked him past the door. You forget your first lock. You forget. Julio looked at the chandelier. It swayed, barely, the gentlest tremor of old iron remembering dance steps above a floor too tired to waltz. Dust let go of itself and fell in soft constellations through the afternoon light. The men were quiet. The house decided it would hold. After they signed the last page, Cherie stacked the papers, squared the edges, and put them into a clear sleeve like evidence, even if the chain of custody was a kitchen crate. Julio felt the room's temperature drop from opera to workshop. He heard hammers waiting. Tino cleared his throat. Gate's been tagged, he said. Stylized crown, not ours. Rival thinks we went soft, another man said. They'll test the fence after dark. Julio didn't answer right away. He walked to the window where plywood cut the view into brown squares and slid a sliver aside to watch the drive. Someone had thrown a lazy spray of white over the old iron, a crown that looked like teeth if you squinted. Let them test, he said finally. They'll find rails that don't give and a door that opens only the way we say. In the corner, the chandelier continued its small, stubborn sway, dust falling like snow that didn't melt when it hit the ground. Plaster dust turned the afternoon light into weather. It drifted in the gallery like the room was thinking out loud, softening the edges of studs and the naked run of conduit along the wall. The chandelier's faint sway had settled. Paper lay where battles had been counted and filed. Outside, the tagged crown on the gate dried to a chalky sneer. Tino and the others faded to the periphery, sweeping, stacking, carrying out the folding table that had hosted the ugliest board meeting of Julio's life. The gallery breathed quieter with every scrape of a broom. When the last boot sound thinned down the corridor, only 3 of them remained. Julio stood at the missing stretch of lath, finger pressed to a seam where the wall once hid servants and secrets. He didn't turn right away. He wanted to feel the room without anyone watching him, learn how. "Sit," Cherie said gently. Not a command. More a suggestion you give a man whose pulse forgot it could slow. He did, lowering onto a sawhorse. His hands were dusty. When he wiped them on his thighs, the red shirt turned the color of old brick. He looked at the blank of the opposite wall, like it could answer him with a memory that made sense. "I didn't buy this house for redemption," he said finally. "I bought it to hide. Quiet place. Rinse the noise off. Pretend my name sounded different when the wind said it." Cherie leaned her shoulder against a column, arms folded in a way that held, not defended. "Hiding is a plan until it isn't," she said. "Ask any mother who closes a door and listens for boots in the hall." He almost laughed. The sound that came out wasn't laughter. "Today I realized the house doesn't care what I intended. It only knows what I build." "That's true of sons, too," she said. He looked up then. The room didn't tilt, but something in him shifted. "You didn't come here for rescue." "No." Her voice didn't harden, it clarified. "I came for ramps and routine, wide turns, a door I could open pushing a chair with my hip and holding a bag with the other hand, people who aren't tired of the sound of a timer reminding us to live. I came because pity makes you small. Ramps don't." He let that line sit like a law someone should have written sooner. Outside, a gull knifed a cry through the eaves. Inside, the dust sailed its slow, patient route from beam to floor. Kyle rolled from the corridor, headphones around his neck, monkey tucked under one arm. He stopped by the balcony rail and leaned forward, checking the zip tie on a temporary guard like a foreman who had to live with whatever men forgot. "How's the inspector?" Julio asked lightly. Kyle grimaced. "He says the ramp lights are cool." He glanced up at Julio, weighing a thought. "I like it when you don't shout." The words came in simple hand tools. They pried at a joint Julio had bolted shut years ago. He nodded once, like a man absorbing a hit and deciding not to fall. "Me too," he said. It landed in him, less a correction than a benediction. Kyle rolled closer, small wheels whispering on grit. "Are the bad men finished?" "For now," Julio said. "Some men need to be told to stop stealing in a language they understand. Today we spoke paper." Kyle considered that, with grave 9-year-old logic. "Good. Paper is quieter." Julio looked at the boy like he was measuring a beam. "I'm writing a rule," he said. "No business that makes a kid like you smaller." Kyle blinked. "What's that mean?" "It means any law, loan, landlord, or man that shrinks you to fit his comfort is off my table," Julio said. "I built things that did the opposite. I didn't see it until you labeled my floor." Kyle smiled, the kind that starts in the eyes and pulls the mouth along like a tide. "Okay," he said, and tapped the ramp rail with his knuckle to hear it answer right. Cherie didn't clap or thank him. She just watched him like a person ready to put her back into whatever a vow asked next. He pushed up from the sawhorse and crossed the wide room. For the first time since this began, he reached without calculating the angle. His hand found her shoulder. Just that no pull, no script. Warmth, dust, weight. "Respect," he said simply, which in his mouth meant, "I heard you. I'll move wood to match." She set her hand atop his for a second, and left it there like a seal. "Likewise," she said, which meant, "I'll hold you to that rule." They stood like that long enough for Kyle to pretend not to notice. Then he took a sheet of copy paper from his lap and held it up. Marker strokes had made a rectangle for the gallery, and a thick green check inside above it. In block letters he printed neat. When he concentrated, he'd written SAFE. "Can I tape it?" he asked. "Column," Cherie said, forgiving, proud. "Where you can see it when you come in." He wheeled to the nearest post and stuck the drawing at child height, pressing each corner with 2 fingers like it was an oath you had to smooth to make true. The green check looked loud in a room that had seen too many red stamps in its prior life. The light shifted. Late afternoon, thinking about giving up. Boots sounded in the corridor. Tino leaned in, cap in hand. "Guy at the gate," he said. "Says he's city. Clipboard, vest, the whole costume." "Send him in," Julio said, palms flattening the dust from his shirt again. The inspector arrived with a smile that always ended in paper cuts. He had the bright vest and the careful hair of a man who never steps in puddles, just writes them up. He scanned the room with appetite, disguised as civic duty. "Mr. Medina," he said. "Beautiful old place. Shame about the condition." "We're fixing what time broke," Julio said. "And perhaps what law requires," the inspector replied, already flipping pages. "This property carries a historical easement. Did you not receive the notice?" "What notice?" Cherie's voice went flat, the way hers did when she heard bureaucracy and jackboots. The clipboard flipped to a form with boxes. Exterior fenestration must match period-appropriate profiles. Ramps may not alter sightlines visible from public way without variance. Guardrails must be wrought iron to approved pattern. Window coverings may not obstruct original glazing. Lighting must be gaslight-style reproduction when visible from the street. He looked up, eyes apologizing without intending to help. "I'm afraid your plywood, your aluminum, your LEDs, none of that will pass. You'll need to remove, or, at minimum, cease use until a hearing." "Cease use," Julio repeated, aligning the words beside Kyle's drawing in his head. "You're telling us to lift the rails and darken the ramp because a stranger prefers a silhouette." "Not my preference, sir. The commission's." He tapped the paper again, pen poised to click. "We'll need to schedule an inspection for violations. There are fines." Kyle stared at his green check on the column, like someone had written a question mark over it. "How long for a variance?" Cherie asked, nice enough to sound like storm cover. 6 to 9 months, the inspector said cheerfully. "Unless there's opposition. There's often opposition." Julio smiled. It wasn't friendly, it wasn't unkind. It had teeth he'd put away for a chapter, and now decided to borrow only the shape of. "You came today because someone asked you to." The inspector's shrug had the angle of a man who had learned not to care what angles meant. "We respond to complaints." "From?" "Anonymous." He tucked the clipboard against his ribs and looked around again like a crow shopping shine. "We'll be in touch." He turned to go. Julio didn't stop him. He looked instead at the ramp lights Kyle had helped place and felt the room he'd thought would hide him pull a different job across his shoulders. Behind the inspector, dust lifted under the door, as if the house had exhaled something old and unpleasant. The green check held to the column, stubborn and bright outside, the tagged crown glared through the slat in the plywood. Tino stepped back in after the vest vanished down the hall. "What now, boss?" Julio glanced from the drawing to the ramp, from Cherie's steady face to Kyle's worried one. He spoke like a man reading a memo to himself. "Now," he said, "we find out how loud paper can get when it's protecting a door." They started building as if someone had called a storm, and the only answer was light. Julio hired crews with reputations instead of cousins with alibis, union carpenters who measured twice and cut once, electricians who brought torque wrenches and code books, masons with wrists like anvils and eyes that liked plumb lines more than gossip. He paid deposits on time and balances early. The first rumor to die was that contractors couldn't trust him. The second was that he didn't know the difference between a straight edge and a straight face. "A to grade everything," he told the site lead, a woman named Delgado, who wore a pencil behind one ear and a stare that made men put their phones away. 1 to 12 slope, non-slip treads, 34 to 38 on the rails, continuous returns, landings every 30 feet. If there's a choice between pretty and safe, safe wins, and then we make it pretty. Delgado nodded, as if he'd passed a first exam. We'll core for the bollards at the ramp footings, she said. You want vehicle stops disguised as planters? Big ones, he said. Dirt and rosemary. Nothing that screams fortress. Everything that tells the truth. The easement letter didn't disappear, but it didn't paralyze them either. Cherie stacked its clauses next to variance requests and began feeding the commission a diet of solutions. Wrought iron profiles for guardrails that matched the archives, ramp edges masked behind hedges, gaslight-style fixtures wired to LEDs no one could tell from the street. Paper came at them like rain. She built gutters. Twice a week she moved a folding table to the gallery and ran intake like it was triage. Tenants with folders and tremors followed the neon tape and the smell of coffee to a line that learned, quickly, to breathe. Some brought eviction notices identical to the fraud they'd received. Some brought nothing but a story and a wristband. Cherie wrote names and dates with a precise hand. What happened? She asked. Never. Why didn't you? She scanned stamps, logged case numbers, photocopied lies. When a person's voice broke, she slid a box of tissues closer like it was another kind of form that needed filling. Kyle took safety tours very seriously. Rails first, he told anyone who would listen. He rapped his knuckles on the guard he'd chosen, solid wood wrapped in iron to please the commission and the weather both, and waited for the answering note. Good ring, he'd say if it rang, bad ring if it didn't. Construction workers twice his size corrected fast when a 9-year-old inspector frowned at their work. He checked ramp textures with his palms. He rolled, stopped, rolled, stopped, testing the slope with a scientist's patience. Not slippery, he'd announce, satisfied. Not today. Sometimes he'd lead a tour in the late afternoon, when the light made the dust look like it was choosing where to land. This is the cool room, he'd say, tapping a door Cherie had outfitted with a soft close. This is quiet if the bad men come back. The men on the cruise didn't joke when he said that. They nodded like he'd told them where to stand if the sea turned. Between permits and deliveries, Julio sat with 2 lawyers at the kitchen crate and drafted the thing he should have started with. The Medina Trust, not a fig leaf. A transfer. The mansion and the land to a charitable entity with a purpose clause you could feel if you ran a thumb across the page. Mobility grants, tenant defense, travel vouchers for pediatric therapy, a 24/7 hotline from the library room that once stored crystal. He drew the board with 5 seats and put a tie-breaking vote on one name. Cherie Matthews, he said. The older lawyer removed his glasses to buy time. Mr. Medina, a non-family chair with tie-break authority. Means I can be outvoted by a mother, Julio said. That's the point. Optics? Better than evictions, he said. Draft it. They tried 3 times to reword the clause so his thumb wasn't off the scale. He pushed the words back until they confessed. When the trust instrument read like a vow instead of a press release, he signed. He didn't trust ink, but he trusted the decision it was pinning to the world. Nights stayed alive. Rival crews dinged the fence with gossip first, then with steel. At 1 a.m, a stolen sedan tested the crown-scarred gates with the kind of courage cowards buy. The car bit the bollards hidden as planters and folded like it had remembered it used to be a soda can. The ramps didn't shiver. The men at the tree line didn't fire. Someone cut the ignition with hands that didn't shake. The ambulance took longer than the tow. Kyle woke to the thud and didn't panic. He watched the peephole at his height until the flashing lights painted stripes on the floor. They hit my planters, he reported gravely at breakfast. They hit your plan, Julio corrected. The rosemary survived. By the second intake week, the porch steps, now half ramp, half history, saw more people going in than the manor had during its last decade. Alive press trucks idled at the road like gulls waiting on a trawler. A rumor churned in town that Medina had gone soft. Another rumor answered that anyone who paid on delivery was a harder man than most. When the first variants came back with conditional approvals, ramps masked, rails profiled, lights disguised, Cherie pinned the letter to the board with 2 pushpins like a window opening in a wall. "More," she said. "We'll need more." She had what looked like a permanent ink stain on one thumb from stamping copies. Julio didn't give statements. He carried plywood, signed checks, held a side of railing while Delgado marked holes. He preferred the kind of leadership that didn't require microphones. But the city required microphones, and so did the moment. They set a small lectern by the gate, between the old iron and the new rosemary. Cameras blinked like a nervous animal. Reporters did that, lean their bodies learn. When a man with a past begins to speak about a future, Julio stepped forward, and then stepped aside. "This is Cherie's vote," he said, and moved back until the lens could feel the shift. Cherie didn't clear her throat or apologize to the crowd for her existence. She spoke plain. "This house used to be a den," she said. "We're turning it into a lighthouse. Lighthouses don't chase storms. They stand where ships can see them, and they keep the light on." She explained the hotline. She explained the grants, the lawyers, the ramps, the way doors open with one hand because someone thought ahead. She explained that pity shrinks people and planning makes space. She didn't say her son's name. The story had already taught her which names belonged to paper and which belonged to kitchen tables. A reporter called, "Ms. Matthews, why you?" And she answered, "Because I know the difference between a firm stamp and a fake one." The cameras loved her for that, but the city, its quieter chambers, took notes for other reasons. Some men turn their volume down when a woman's competence enters the room, some turn the screws. The press conference ended not with a cheer, but with a softer sound. The kind of murmur you hear in waiting rooms when strangers realize they're not alone. People approached not for autographs, but for clipboards. That night the wind came from the west and smelled like creosote and secrets. Julio walked the perimeter twice. The rosemary planters were damp from a mist that never became rain. The boathouse stood dark, a silhouette with a broken smile. The first smell reached him before his flashlight did, a sweet, hungry odor that changes the shape of air. Fire. He ran, light cutting the path in jerks. The boathouse doors gaped at angles a carpenter would never accept. Inside, char made feathers on the rafters. The fire ate quietly. Someone had killed it before it could tell a story loud enough for the neighbors. The concrete floor wore a black star where tires had rested. What remained of the tires puddled like licorice in winter. He coughed, pulled his shirt over his mouth, and circled the husk of the sedan they'd left. Not the crash car. Another, dumped with its windows shattered and its hood buckled by a small explosion meant to be seen, not to impress. He yanked the rear door. The handle worked. The door swung with a terrible courtesy. A cardboard box sat on the back seat, edges singed, top open. Inside, a neat stack of legal papers that had survived because someone had planned the burn that way. The first page stared up, bold and municipal. Eviction. Notice. Landlord. Julio Medina. Properties. A list long enough to be an accusation, addresses in poor handwriting that made cruelty look casual. He sifted one page, then another. The stamps were crisp. The clerk's initials were forged clean. The dates ranged forward and backward like a man trying keys in a lock. Behind him, the tide thudded the pilings like a hand at the back door. Julio closed the box, as if that could shut the room's temperature down. The edges of the cardboard ticked against his palms. In the dark outside, the rosemary held its ground, smelling like cooking in a house that refused to break. He lifted the box. It was heavier than paper and lighter than guilt. He carried it toward the light with a face that told anyone watching, We build lighthouses for nights exactly like this." They didn't hide the box. They rolled it to the gate the next morning and set it on a folding table beside the lectern like a science exhibit. Anatomy of a forgery. Cherie wore the same washed sweater and a calm that made microphones lean closer. She lifted a notice with 2 fingers, held it to the light. "This is what a lie looks like on paper," she said. "Wrong routing, photocopied seal, clerk initials borrowed from a retirement party. It says eviction, but what it means is, we think you won't check. We checked." Cameras clicked. A lawyer in shirt sleeves from a downtown firm raised his hand. "You're making a complaint?" "We're making a template," Cherie replied, laying out a packet, side-by-side comparisons of real stamps and fake ones, statutory cites, a checklist titled, "How to Bother a Bully." "If you have one of these, bring it. We'll run it through the list. If it fails, we file motions. If it passes, we ask why." The shirt-sleeves lawyer stepped forward. "I'll take the first 20, pro bono." A woman behind him said, "Make it 40. A third added, "Our clinic will staff intake Fridays." Reporters pivoted to Julio, ready to needle. "Mr. Medina, some say you've gone soft." Julio nodded, dust still on his cuffs. "Ask my contractors," he said. "They'll tell you exactly how soft I am." Delgado obliged on cue, straight to camera. "He's the most exacting client I've had in 20 years. He pays on time and makes us rebuild anything that isn't safe. That's not soft. That's standards." The clip traveled faster than the rumor. The city began to split into 2 camps, people who wanted the house to be a story they could sneer at, and people who wanted their door to open with one hand because someone thought ahead. The counterpunch came in suits. A polite letter arrived from a bank that liked anonymous money. It froze. Certain transactions connected to the Medina Trust pending review. 2 hours later, a second bank sent a similar notice. Julio slit the envelopes with a box cutter and looked to Cherie. "Rivas," she said, already opening a binder labeled Custodians. "He's trying to make us wobble in the open. We anticipated this." Behind her, tabbed dividers were staggered custodial accounts with different institutions, none holding more than a week's operating cash. Escrow arrangements that required 2 signatures, one of them hers, and an automatic sweep to a credit union. The rivals never used because it required identification that made them itchy. She dialed 3 numbers, spoke 3 languages: law, banking, structure. "Release per clause 9C, she told the first. "Trust instrument attached." To the second, "You don't get to freeze a 501c3 on an unsigned tip." To the third, "Yes, you can fax the variance letter directly to your compliance team. They can put the paper next to their conscience." Julio watched the freeze thaw while the coffee cooled. He scrawled RIVAS across a legal pad and drew a small crown over the I without meaning to. Then he scratched it out until the paper frayed. Late that afternoon, Kyle went pale in a way Cherie knew in her bones before the thermometer said it aloud. "Protocol," he whispered, and his voice didn't panic. Cherie tapped the wall timer, beep, beep, and opened the high bathroom window 2 inches. Julio fetched the battery lantern. Tino brought the car around the back ramp while Delgado cleared a path with her forearm like a plow. In under 3 minutes, Kyle was rolled, strapped, and moving. The hospital wristband clicked into place 20 later. "It's a virus," the physician said, gentle but not condescending. "He'll be okay." Back home, Kyle slept under the constellation's blanket while Cherie sat in the doorway counting his breaths and the ways the house had held. "System works," Julio said from the hall, quiet enough not to wake the boy. "It has to," Cherie said. "We built it because nobody else would." By week's end, the trust's lawyers filed a motion stack that looked like a short staircase. They walked it into court with courteous force. The judge, tired eyes, sharp pen, read, asked 2 questions, then signed. "Order validating the Medina Trust," the clerk intoned. "Easement waivers granted for accessibility modifications pending commission oversight." His voice had all the music of a stamp. Julio held the order in the hallway, where things echo more than they should. Paper felt like a beam you could stand on. Cherie took a photo, not for the press, for her folder, and slid the original into a sleeve. They returned to find the porch busier than ever. A mother with a sleeping baby on her chest asked if she could just sit in the quiet a minute. A man with paint on his hands offered to cut trim if someone would show him where the mitre lives. Kyle woke feverless and demanded a tour. He tapped the rail and said, "Good ring," with extra gusto, as if the court order had tuned the metal. But Rivas wasn't finished writing letters in shadows. A process server left a tidy stack of inquiries about the trust's governance. A blogger who never left his kitchen called Julio a PR priest. It didn't smell like fear. It smelled like a tantrum performed as journalism. "Let it run," Julio said. "We'll keep building." That night, the Rosemary bent to a stiff wind. The lights along the ramp glowed like fish under a dock, visible if you knew where to look, almost invisible if you didn't. Julio walked the perimeter, listening to the rails hum back his steps. He liked the ring. He didn't trust quiet. A courier van eased to the gate and idled. The driver hopped out, left an envelope on the post, and drove off without waiting for a signature. Julio stared at the rectangle like it might declare its own contents if he gave it time. He didn't. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen crate, and slit it with the same blade that opened the forgery box. No logo, no return address. A single set of documents inside, clipped, thick with seals that felt like they'd been pressed by a hand that understood weight. He read the first page, then read it again, because sometimes the world tries kindness in a font you don't trust. Quitclaim deed. Grantor, Harbor View. Holdings, LLC. Grantee, the Medina Trust. Consideration, $10 and other value received. Legal. The parcel, the house, the boathouse, the easements, the strip of scrub to the waterline, tied with a bow of legalese that said, irrevocable, unconditional, recorded upon receipt. Someone had just gifted the mansion to the trust. Julio felt the ground tilt in the direction of gratitude and suspicion, both. He showed Cherie. She scanned the signatures, the notary block, the county recorder stamp that smudged like it should when you rubbed it. "Anonymous?" she asked. "Anonymous," he said. Kyle rolled in, hair a drowsy halo, and squinted at the paper like it might be a map. "Is it good?" "It could be," Cherie said, eyes on the notary seal, wary and hopeful in the same breath. "Or it's a hook." Julio held the deed up. The candlelight turned the paper the color of old parchment, as if history had finally decided to cooperate. Outside, the Rosemary shivered at the edge of the property, somewhere beyond the gate. A car engine paused like a man holding his breath. "Who gives away a house?" Julio said to the room, to the air, to the past. No one answered. The envelope didn't either. The signature line smiled up at them without telling its name. Spring found the house awake. Morning settled into the gutted ballroom as if it had been invited. Light rubbed the plaster dust until it glowed, and the air carried coffee, lemon cleaner, and a hint of rosemary from the planters that now hid the bollards. Long tables held clipboards, numbered tickets, a tray of pens tied to strings so they wouldn't walk away. Strollers coasted in on soft tires, wheelchairs hummed, a walker's tennis balls whispered over the freshly leveled floor. The old chandelier, rewired and compliant, lifted its small suns above all of it. "Intake on the left," Cherie called, voice steady, warm. "Lawyers in the library. If you have a notice, we'll check it. If you need a ride to clinic, put your name on blue." Julio stood behind the coffee urns, sleeves rolled, pouring for whoever nodded and for whoever was too proud to nod. A teenager with a wrist brace offered to help. Julio handed him the second pitcher like a baton. Out by the porch, Delgado's crew finished reinstalling the double doors, reframed, balanced, and hung so that a child could open them with one hand while the other held a bag, a book, a rail. At 10, the notary arrived with the last stack. Julio led him to the crate that still served as a desk for promises. The anonymous deed had checked out. The county confirmed the smudged seal was honest. Today made it more than honest. Today made it permanent. Final transfers, the notary said, tapping the pages into a tidy pile. Estate to the Medina Trust in fie simple absolute. Covenants recorded no clawback provisions. Julio signed where the flags told him to, the pen heavier than a weapon and lighter than a debt. He felt each stroke like a hinge seating. When the last page bore his name, he looked up and found Cherie at the doorway, watching. He lifted the folder slightly, not as a flourish but as a quiet report. We did the thing we said we would do. She smiled, then returned to the table and rapped a knuckle for order. Board hearing, she announced, and the murmur thinned. The gallery had become a small court. 2 folding tables, 3 chairs to a side, a clock that didn't care about anyone's nerves. Case 17, she said. 3 families, same landlord, identical notices. She held up a page that matched the forgery box from months ago and smiled without humor. We've seen this handwriting before. A pro bono attorney laid out affidavits. A clinic worker testified about a broken elevator. Cherie compared stamps, pointed to a wrong statute, and asked the question that always cut quickest. Who benefits if you leave? When the answers were done and the papers had been touched by enough honest hands, the board chair spoke the words the room had started to believe in. Vacated, she said, once, twice, 3 times, each like a door unlatched, and the people at the table cried the quiet kind, the kind that shakes the shoulders but not the voice, because the voice had already done its work. Between hearings, Kyle ran a new tour. The boy beside him had fresh braces and the stiff, wary gait of someone who had learned to negotiate with pain and with pity. Both, this way, Kyle said. We go slow. Watch the slope. He placed his palm on the brass rail, felt the cool, and waited for the other child's hand to find the same piece of metal. Together they touched the rail like it could answer. It did. The ring was true. At the top landing, Kyle turned them so the light fell on their faces in the way he liked. If the generator stops, he said, lantern is here. If the men shout, we go to the cool room. If nobody is shouting, we breathe. The boy nodded, trying the words on like a jacket that might finally fit. In the yard, a camera truck idled respectfully. A reporter rehearsed lines that would make someone else's show. Julio felt the air tug him toward the gate, and stayed inside. Interviews had tried to cast him as prodigal, as penitent, as brand new. He wasn't new. He was exact. When a volunteer asked if he wanted the mic, he shook his head and gestured towards the gallery. The city keeps calling it Medina's house, a young producer said as he passed with a coil of cable. Julio topped off the water in the urn and answered to no one in particular. It's Cherie's vote. The room heard him anyway. Some people looked up. Most didn't. They were busy writing their names on the lines that mattered. By noon, contractors finished the last door that stuck. Delgado ran a palm over the hinge like a musician tuning. Try it, she told an elderly man waiting nearby. He pressed. The door swung clean, weight caught by lumber that wouldn't warp with the first rain. He smiled like a child and stepped into a room that had practiced not making him smaller. Outside, the sea lifted and set itself again, breathing against the shore. The tagged crown on the gate had been sand-blasted away. In its place, iron scrolled in a pattern approved by a commission that had learned how to sign waivers without choking on them. Rosemary leaned in the planters, green flags that smelled like supper at houses that had kept their pots. Afternoon blurred into the hour when light goes gentle and rooms remember what they're for. Cherie signed 3 more letters. The hotline rang, was answered, rang again. A man with paint on his hands cut trim to match a documented profile. smiling when Kyle tapped approval with the authority of a small foreman. Tino hauled a box of donated space heaters, only to laugh and put them back when he remembered. The house's heat worked now. A woman with a stroller paused at the threshold, hand on the new brass, and looked back at Julio. "You built this?" she asked. "We built this," he corrected, glancing at Cherie, at Delgado, at the volunteers with clipboards, at the board with green checks taped by a child. He didn't point to the trust papers, to the signatures, to the sleepless nights. He lifted his chin towards the door instead. "Push," he said. "See?" She did. The door moved like obedience without fear. Evening fell. The line thinned to a few conversations in corners, to the creak of a stroller, to a couple counting through a budget with a volunteer who'd once been a client. Julio stepped into the gallery and stared at the column where Kyle's drawing had hung for months. It was worn at the corners now, edges curled, the green check still shouting its simple truth. Safe. He pressed it flatter with his palm and left the print there for a second, a smudge in the shape of a vow. "Closing in 10, Cherie called gently, and the house complied. Clipboards stacked, cups gathered, the chandelier dimmed on a timer someone had programmed with a tenderness that would never make the news. Julio lifted the sandbag with both hands and propped the front door open. Sea wind rushed in, testing the new windows that no longer rattled themselves loose they held. The rosemary bent, recovered. Somewhere a gull laughed at something only gulls find funny. On the porch, a man hesitated with a crumpled notice in his pocket, eyes on the door like he wasn't sure if he belonged. Kyle rolled to the threshold, braced, and knocked once on the rail. "You can come in," he said. "We planned for you." The man stepped forward, pulled by the promise of tables and pens, of coffee and order, of voices that didn't shout. Behind him, the ballroom breathed, the sound of paper made honest, of hinges set right, of a house that had learned how to be a lighthouse without forgetting it had once been a den. Night carried salt and something like relief. Inside, the door stayed open, on purpose. And in the long exhale between tide and tide, the house simply lived, passing air from one room to the next, the way a chest learns to do when fear leaves enough space for breath. If this story has your attention, hit that subscribe button and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Every story we tell connects the past to the present, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one.